No gifts this year? We're keeping it simple, my mother had said. An hour later, my kids and I stepped into her slate-gray living room to find a mountain of presents under the towering pine tree, gold tags, velvet bows, and embossed initials all addressed to her favorite employees and their families from our company. Halberd and Lane. None of them were for us. That night was the last time she would use generosity as a weapon. I'm Nora Vale, 34 years old, head of compliance for Halberd and Lane, and a single mother to 2 children who still believed in the kind of magic that came in brightly wrapped boxes. That belief was about to be systematically dismantled. The air in North Alder Point was cold and sharp, smelling of wet slate and the clean, sterile scent of money that had been in the same families for generations. My mother's house was less a home and more an architectural statement, a fortress of dark stone and plate glass windows that stared out at the manicured street like vacant eyes. Inside, the heat was a dry, oppressive blanket. The first thing that hit you was the scent of the Christmas tree, a colossal Fraser fir that scraped the cathedral ceiling. It wasn't the warm, nostalgic smell of pine. It was a powerful, almost chemical fragrance, the scent of a tree that had been curated, not decorated. And at its base, the reason we were here, a mountain of gifts. They weren't just stacked, they were arranged. A carefully constructed landscape of corporate largesse. The wrapping paper was a deep, uniform burgundy, the color of a vintage Merlot, thick and expensive to the touch. Each box was tied with a gold velvet ribbon, the bows perfectly symmetrical, as if tied by a machine, and on every single one, a crisp, cream-colored tag, the name of the recipient written in flawless calligraphy. Beneath the name, embossed in gold foil, were the words, "With love from Halberd and Lane." My 7-year-old son, Leo, stood beside me, his small hand tightening in mine. His eyes, wide and full of a hope I suddenly wished I had extinguished in the car, scanned the sea of presents. My daughter, 9-year-old Maya, was quieter, her gaze methodical, already sensing the truth. "Mom." Leo's voice was a small, clear whisper in the low hum of adult conversation. "Is my name not on any?" A shard of ice slid into my gut. I looked down at his upturned face, at the faint dusting of freckles across his nose. I saw the pure, unadulterated question there, a child's simple inventory of the world. He wasn't accusing, not yet. He was just trying to understand the data in front of him. I knelt, my knees protesting against the cold hardwood floor, and smoothed the collar of his shirt. "It's okay, sweetie," I said, the words feeling like sandpaper in my throat. "Remember what Grandma said? We're keeping it simple this year." It was a lie, a flimsy shield against a truth as massive and solid as the house around us. A shadow fell over us. "That's right, Nora, you understand." My mother, Marla Vale, stood there, a champagne flute held delicately in one hand. At 57, she was immaculate, her silver blonde hair styled in a severe but elegant bob, her dress a tailored sheath of navy blue that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. She smiled, a bright, wide, perfectly rehearsed expression that never quite reached her eyes. It was her talk show host smile, the one she used for quarterly meetings and charity galas, the one that broadcast warmth and empathy while feeling like a closed door. "We're all making sacrifices this year, darling," she continued, her voice smooth and reasonable. "It's about togetherness, not materialism." She gestured vaguely at the pile of materialism behind her. "This is just a little something for the team, a gesture." I stood up, pulling Leo close to my side. Maya had already gravitated toward the far wall, pretending to be interested in a bleak, abstract painting. She knew the language of exclusion better than her brother did. My gaze drifted over the little something I am, by trade, a woman who notices details. It is my job to see what people are trying to hide in plain sight. The long, thin box addressed to the teenage son of our chief operating officer, Douglas Finch, had the distinct shape of a new MacBook Pro, The smaller, heavier cube for the wife of our head of sales bore the logo of a luxury Swiss watchmaker. And then there were the envelopes, stiff and formal, tucked between the larger parcels. I saw one addressed to the daughter of our CFO, a girl just starting college. The return address wasn't a person, but the brokerage firm that handled our company's stock plans. These weren't gestures. These were bonuses, significant ones. The entire living room was a stage. The gift mountain was the centerpiece, brightly lit by recessed spotlights in the ceiling. The seating, low, minimalist sofas and armchairs, was arranged around it, forcing everyone to face the spectacle. It was a clear hierarchy. There were the givers, my mother and by extension, the company's leadership. There were the chosen receivers, the families of her favorite executives, their children now gleefully tearing into the wine-dark paper. And then there was the audience, me, my children, positioned in the wings, meant to observe and understand our place. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, cut through the noise, an email from last week. The subject line, important update, Q4 bonus pool. The body was brief, full of corporate jargon about unforeseen market headwinds and the necessity of fiscal prudence. It announced a company-wide cut to the annual bonus pool. The final line read, "We are all in this together, and we appreciate your shared sacrifice for the health of the company." The email was signed, Marla Vale, Chief Human Resources Officer, Halbert and Lane. My heart didn't break. It went still. It wasn't the absence of presence for my own children that did it. It wasn't the hypocrisy, as blatant and glaring as the chandelier overhead. It was the sound of the other children, the sons and daughters of vice presidents and directors, squealing with delight as they held up new electronics, their parents beaming with pride, and layered over that, the profound, crushing silence of my own children. Leo was no longer looking at the presents. He was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped. Maya was a small, still statue by the wall, her face a perfect, unreadable mask. They were learning a lesson my mother had been teaching me my whole life. There are two kinds of family, the one you are born into, and the one that is useful. My heel brushed against something on the thick wool rug. I looked down. It was one of the gift tags, torn from its velvet ribbon in the frenzy. I bent down and picked it up. The cardstock was thick and textured, the kind of paper that costs $5 a sheet. The calligraphy was elegant, for Remy Carter, Douglas Finch's youngest son, and beneath it, in a smaller typed font, were 3 words that made the air freeze in my lungs. Equity units enclosed. This wasn't a watch. This wasn't a laptop. This was a direct transfer of company value, a stock grant, disguised as a Christmas present, funneled through a wellness gift program to the child of a top executive during a year of supposed shared sacrifice. It was a violation of SEC regulations. It was a breach of fiduciary duty. It was fraud. A switch flipped in my head. The low thrum of the party faded into white noise. The scent of pine and perfume vanished. The warm, festive lighting seemed to turn harsh and interrogative. My vision narrowed, focusing on the tag in my hand, then panning out to the scene before me. My mother, laughing with the CFO, her hand on his arm, the COO, Douglas Finch, watching his son unbox a gift that was, in fact, a piece of the company I worked to protect. The other executives, all participants, all beneficiaries. This wasn't a family Christmas party. This was the scene of a crime, and I was the only one who saw it. My mother is the Chief Human Resources Officer at Halbert and Lane, but her unofficial title, the one whispered in hallways and printed in glossy company newsletters, is the Mom of H&L. She cultivated this persona with the meticulous care of a master gardener. Marla Vale wasn't just an executive. She was the company's heart, its conscience, the keeper of its sacred culture. She remembered birthdays, sent flowers for family emergencies, and knew the names of every vice president's children. She built a corporate family, and at its head, she was the benevolent matriarch. I got my job in the compliance department on my own merit. I have a law degree from Georgetown and 5 years of experience at a top-tier firm in Manhattan. I was, by any objective measure, overqualified for the senior analyst position I applied for. Yet, my application was stalled for 3 weeks. When I finally asked her about it, she waved a dismissive hand, not looking up from a report she was reading. "Just a formality, Nora. We have to ensure a proper cultural fit." It was the first and last time she would ever so nakedly admit that she was the gatekeeper, that even my own qualifications had to be filtered through her subjective lens. My entry into Halbert and Lane wasn't a homecoming. It was a granting of passage, a subtle reminder of who held the keys. Growing up, her mantra was consistent. "Don't make waves. Nora, keep your head down. The world rewards those who are agreeable." At home, she taught me the art of invisibility, of accommodation. At the office, however, she created tidal waves for those who knew how to ride them, for the people who bowed, who laughed at the right jokes, who called her Mom. It's why so many of my colleagues use that title. It's an honorific, a sign that you are inside the circle of her protection. I have never called her that at work, in meetings, in reports, in any official capacity. She is Marla. It is a line I draw in the sand, a sterile boundary between the woman who raised me and the executive whose actions I am professionally obligated to scrutinize. The previous year, the insult had been more subtle. When the annual bonuses were distributed, my direct deposit was significantly smaller than I had projected. In its place was a corporate email announcing I had been awarded premium wellness vouchers in recognition of my hard work. They could be redeemed for things like online therapy sessions, yoga classes, or meal kit delivery services. It was a classic Marla move, spinning a cost-cutting measure into a gesture of employee care. That same week, I saw the internal filing for new issuances of restricted stock units. Among the recipients were the 19-year-old son of our chief financial officer and the 22-year-old daughter of Douglas Finch. Our COO, their hard work, apparently, was valued in company equity. Mine was valued in a subscription to a meditation app. That was when I started digging. As head of compliance, I have access to ledgers and accounts that are invisible to most. I found it tucked away in a subfolder of the corporate social responsibility budget, the Community and Employee Wellness Gift Fund. On the surface, it looked legitimate. It was funded by charitable contributions from our major vendors and suppliers. These vendors, eager to stay in the company's good graces, would donate tens of thousands of dollars for CSR initiatives, but the outflow from the fund was a black box. The records were vague, with line items like Q3 employee recognition or holiday wellness distribution. There were no itemized receipts, no list of recipients. The fund was controlled exclusively by the Office of the CHRO. My mother's office. The money went in as vendor kickbacks disguised as charity, and it came out as wellness gifts. It came out as the mountain of presents currently dominating her living room. The relationship between my mother and Douglas Finch was the central pillar of the company's power structure. It was a seamless alliance that had weathered multiple CEOs and market downturns. Their professional lives were so intertwined, it was impossible to see where one ended and the other began. Every year, during performance reviews, they would hold a series of closed-door calibration sessions. It was in those meetings that fates were decided. I know because I have the minutes. I have kept meticulous records of every salary adjustment meeting I was privy to, every bonus allocation discussion. I have spreadsheets that show the names of high-performing, deserving employees being quietly replaced with the names of the children or relatives of board members and senior executives. My name had been on those lists, and I had seen it crossed out. Whenever I tried to broach the subject with her, to ask why my own career trajectory seemed to be permanently stalled, her response was always the same, delivered with that patient, slightly disappointed smile. "Nora, your family. You have to be more understanding than anyone. Your time will come. Just wait until next year." It was a brilliant, cruel tactic. She used our blood tie as a leash, demanding a level of patience and sacrifice from me that she would never ask of a stranger, while simultaneously rewarding strangers over me. The promise of next year was a perpetual horizon, a destination I was never meant to reach. And now, standing here in her slate gray living room, holding a gift tag that promised company equity to the COO's son, I understood. Next year had finally arrived. It was here, piled high under the scentless, perfect tree. All the deferred promotions, the redirected bonuses, the hollow promises, they had all been converted into these expensive, beautifully wrapped packages. My mother had built her corporate family with the bricks of the company itself, and the price of that construction had been paid by people like me, and by the children standing silently at my side. The warmth of the room was a lie. The laughter was a lie. The entire concept of the mom of H&L was the most profound lie of all. This was not a family. This was a syndicate, and the woman at the center of it, the one now raising her glass for a toast, was my mother. But in this moment, looking at the evidence in my hand and the crime scene all around me, she was only Marla. My fingers, steady and precise, closed around the small, thick card. In the warm, crowded room, it felt cold. A rectangle of frozen truth. My thumb was a millimeter from the embossed company logo. I didn't need to feel it to know it was there. My entire world was built on the policies that logo was supposed to represent. Fairness, transparency, accountability, all of it a lie, written on expensive paper. With my body angled away from the main gathering, I brought my phone up, the movement casual, as if checking a message, the camera focused, the lens captured the elegant script, for Remy Carter, and the damning subscript below it. Equity units enclosed, but I wasn't looking at the words anymore. My focus was on a small alphanumeric code printed at the very bottom of the tag, almost lost in the decorative border, WLG Charity 23Q4. The code was an anchor, and it dragged a chain of memories up from the depths of my professional consciousness. WLG, Wellness Ledger Gift, Charity, the Community and Employee Wellness Gift Fund, 23Q4. The fourth quarter of this fiscal year. It was an internal tracking number, a digital breadcrumb that never should have been printed on a physical tag. It was sloppy, arrogant, and it was the first thread of the web. I remembered the invoices. 3 months ago, I'd been conducting a routine audit of our top vendors. North Ferry Logistics, a major shipping partner, had a recurring charitable contribution line item that seemed disproportionately large. It was flagged for review. When I requested the documentation, the invoice was perfect, listing a single bulk payment to the Halberd and Lane CSR Fund. But in the shipping manifest attached as a supporting document, I'd noticed a discrepancy. The delivery address for the donated marketing materials wasn't our corporate headquarters. It was a residential address in North Alder Point. My mother's address. At the time, I had rationalized it. Perhaps she was storing items for a charity drive. I had made a note, a small, quiet query in a file no one else would ever read. Now, that query was screaming. The paper cuts from 1,000 such files were beginning to bleed. My fingers tightened on my phone, inside my clutch. My wallet felt heavy. I didn't need to open it to picture my employee ID card. Beneath my photo and name, in small, silver letters, was a designation few people in the company even knew existed: Compliance Escalation Authority. It was a relic of a post-Enron corporate governance overhaul, a clause buried deep in the company bylaws. It granted me, in the event of a suspected high-level breach of fiduciary duty, the unilateral power to access any and all internal documents without prior executive approval. It was a nuclear option, designed to be a deterrent, never to be used, until now. My gaze lifted from my phone and swept the room, my mind shifting from analyst to investigator. The scene before me was no longer a party. It was a series of exhibits. Exhibit A, the mountain of gifts. Exhibit B, the compromised executives, their faces flushed with wine and self-satisfaction. And then, on a polished mahogany console table near the hallway, Exhibit C, a stack of black, lacquered envelopes. They were perfectly aligned, each sealed not with glue, but with a dollop of dark red wax. stamped with the Halbert and Lane corporate seal. They were identical to the envelopes I'd seen tucked into the gift pile, the ones containing stock certificates. This was the distribution point. I looked higher, my eyes tracing the clean lines of the ceiling, and there it was, tucked into the corner where the wall met the ceiling, a discreet, dome-shaped security camera. Its tiny blue light was on. It was recording. My mother, in her obsession with control and her love of performance, would never miss an opportunity to capture a moment of her own magnanimity. She was documenting her crime in high-definition video. I turned away, creating a shield with my body, and typed a quick encrypted message to my junior legal assistant, a sharp young man named Ben who owed his career to a hiring recommendation I'd made against my mother's preference. The message was brief, the language precise. Pull the full, unredacted 23Q4 wellness ledger, cross-referenced against the vendor's CSR contribution file. I need the raw data, not the summary report. Urgent. Use escalation authority code 7B. Confirm receipt. I hit send. The small vibration in my hand a moment later was Ben's confirmation. The first gear of the machine had turned. A small tug on my sleeve. I looked down into Maya's serious face. Her eyes were dark and knowing, far older than her 9 years. She didn't look at the presents or the other children. She just looked at me. "Mom," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost a thought. "Are you sad?" The question was a perfectly aimed arrow, piercing through the armor of professional detachment I was so carefully constructing. The ice in my gut cracked. For a heartbeat. The anger and the betrayal washed over me, raw and hot. I wanted to lie to her, to protect her with the same platitudes I had used on her brother, but her gaze demanded the truth. "Yes," I answered, my voice as quiet as hers. "I am, and I'm working." She nodded once, a gesture of profound and solemn understanding. She squeezed my hand, then retreated back to her quiet spot by the wall. A silent sentinel. Her trust was a whetstone, sharpening my resolve. My eyes went back to the gift pile, and this time I saw the full pattern. I scanned the names on the tags I could see. Weston, Albright, Davies, surnames of our board of directors. A large, awkwardly shaped gift was for the grandson of the chairman. Another, a sleek box from a high-end electronics store, was for the daughter of our lead counsel, and everywhere, the name Carter, for the children of Douglas Finch. This wasn't a random assortment of favorites. This was a systematic enrichment of the company's ruling class, a closed loop of patronage funded by our business partners. As I took a step back, a strand of the expensive burgundy ribbon, torn loose from a package, snagged on the heel of my shoe. It trailed behind me like a chain. My first instinct was to bend down, to untangle it, to tidy up, to erase the evidence of the mess. But I stopped. I looked at the ribbon, a silken trail of corruption clinging to me. I left it there. Let it be a witness. Let it show that I had walked through the scene, that I was now part of it. Across the room, my mother tapped a crystal glass with her fingernail. The clear, ringing sound cutting through the chatter. The room fell silent. She beamed, her talk show smile at its most brilliant. "If I could have everyone's attention," she began, her voice resonating with practiced warmth. "I just want to take a moment to look around this room, to see all of you, my wonderful, wonderful team, my family." People smiled. Some raised their glasses in anticipation. "This has been a challenging year," she continued, a note of faux solemnity in her voice. "We've all had to tighten our belts, to make sacrifices, but we did it together, and that's what Halbert and Lane is all about. We are a family, we are teammates, and tonight is about gratitude." She raised her glass high, to family, to teammates, and to the gratitude that binds us all. A chorus of "Hear, hear," and cheers echoed around the room. Glasses clinked. My mother's eyes found mine across the space, and she gave me a small, conspiratorial wink, as if to say, "See, you understand." I didn't reach for a champagne flute. I didn't smile. I simply raised my phone. its dark, reflective screen catching the light. I found a quiet alcove near the back of the house, a small, cold space between a bookshelf filled with unread leather-bound classics and a window looking out onto the dark, frozen lawn. The sounds of the party were a dull murmur here. It was my new office. My phone was no longer a personal device. It was a terminal. My fingers moved with a speed and certainty that felt disconnected from the turmoil inside me. Escalation Authority Code 7B. Entering the string of characters into the secure portal felt like turning a key in a vault door. The system, designed to throw up firewalls and require multi-level approvals, simply melted away. I was in. The server directory was a stark, text-based landscape, the company's digital skeleton. I navigated to the finance archives, then to the subdirectory for the CHRO's discretionary funds. The file was right where Ben's message confirmed it would be. Ledger WLG 23 Core, RAW, XLSX. The spreadsheet opened, a sterile grid of black and white. It was thousands of lines long, detailing every expenditure from the wellness fund. I scrolled past the smaller items, floral arrangements, gift baskets, catered lunches. I was looking for the large, lump sum entries, and then I found them, a series of payments, all coded WLG Charity 23Q4. The vendor was listed as North Ferry Logistics. The amounts were staggering, 6 figures each, but it was the final column that made my breath catch. It was a column that didn't exist in the public-facing summary reports. The column header was simple, innocuous, and utterly devastating. Equity Kickback Designation. Beside each payment to North Ferry Logistics, this column contained a name and a number of stock units. Remy Carter, 500 RSU, Landon Albright, 750 RSU, Sophia Davies, 500 RSU. It was a shadow ledger, meticulously tracking how the vendor donations were being funneled back, not as cash, but as company equity, directly to the children of the executives and board members. It was a money laundering scheme of breathtaking simplicity, converting vendor kickbacks into untraceable generational wealth, all under the guise of corporate wellness and charity. Click, the first tumbler in the lock fell into place. My mind raced back to the North Ferry Logistics file. I pulled it up from the vendor audit archives. On paper, they were a legitimate enterprise, a corporate address, a tax ID number, a decade of service contracts with Halbert and Lane, but something had always felt off. They had no website, no public presence. They were a ghost. Now, I knew why. They weren't a logistics company. They were a shell, a purpose-built vehicle for this exact fraud. I ran a cross-check. The corporate address listed for North Ferry Logistics was a mail drop in a commercial park downtown, a dead end. But I dug deeper, into the original incorporation documents from 10 years ago. And there it was, a secondary contact address, listed for billing inquiries, a PIO box. My fingers flew across the keyboard, opening a separate investigation file I had started months ago on Douglas Finch. He was the public face of the company's biggest charitable endeavor, the H&L Cares Foundation. I pulled up the foundation's public registration documents, the official mailing address, the same PIO box. Click, the second tumbler fell. North Ferry Logistics was a fiction, a financial cutout controlled by our chief operating officer. The final piece wasn't on the server. It was personal. I had access to my mother's company email account, a legacy of my role in setting up executive security protocols years ago. I had never used it. It felt like a line I shouldn't cross. Tonight, there were no more lines. I logged in. Her inbox was a monument to her manipulative genius, a tapestry of carefully worded consolations and strategic praises. I went to her drafts folder. There was only one file. It was an email to the CFO, dated 2 weeks ago. The subject line was holiday gifts. The body was short. Davies is confirmed for his grandson. Finch is handling the Carter distribution directly. I'll manage the rest. We'll skip Nora this year. She doesn't need a gift. She'll understand. It's cleaner this way. She'll understand. The words were a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. She hadn't forgotten. She hadn't overlooked me. She had made a calculated decision. I was not just excluded. I was the designated understanding party, the family member whose silence was assumed, whose compliance was taken for granted. It wasn't an oversight. It was my function in her system. The grief was a flash fire, hot and quick, and then it was gone, leaving behind something cold and hard and clear. I began to work. 17 files, that was the number, the raw ledger, the North Ferry Incorporation documents, the cross-referenced PO, box registration, the vendor invoices with my mother's delivery address, the security camera footage request logs, the email draft, the official company policy on executive compensation and gifting, which they were violating on every possible level, one by one. I downloaded them as encrypted PDFs. Using my authority, I applied a digital signature to each file, a cryptographic seal that embedded the precise time and date of access into the document's metadata. Each signature was an irrefutable, unalterable testament. I was here. I saw this. This is the truth, as it existed at this exact moment. I created a new folder on my personal cloud storage, a secure drive legally sanctioned by my employment contract for the preservation of sensitive compliance materials. I uploaded all 17 files, a triple redundancy, local, company server, and a legally protected off-site backup. The evidence was now secure. It was permanent. Next, I opened a secure, anonymous messaging service and addressed a message to the public tip line for the Halberd and Lane Ethics Committee. To the members of the committee, I wrote, an anonymous whistleblower wishes to draw your attention to a severe and ongoing breach of fiduciary duty involving senior executives, including the CHRO and COO. The scheme involves the misappropriation of vendor funds through the Community and Employee Wellness Gift Fund for the purpose of distributing undeclared equity compensation to family members. This action constitutes securities fraud, tax evasion, and a violation of multiple company bylaws. Verifiable, time-stamped evidence is available. I paused. The core of the message was anonymous, but anonymity was a shield for the weak. I was not weak. I added one final sentence. This information is submitted by Nora Vale, head of compliance. I sent the message. There was no turning back. My final act was one of theater. I found a blank, elegant Christmas card on my mother's mahogany desk. Inside, I drew a single, neat QR code with a pen. The code linked to the secure cloud folder containing the 17 files. Beneath it, I wrote, timestamp, Deck 24, 8:52 p.m. Est. I walked back into the living room, my movements calm and deliberate. The party was still in full swing. I located the largest, most ostentatious gift box under the tree. The tag was written in my mother's own hand, from H&L to our chosen family. I carefully slipped the ribbon, lifted the corner of the lid, and slid the white card inside, placing it on top of the tissue paper, a Trojan horse, delivered into the heart of their celebration. As I turned, my eyes fell on the mantelpiece above the fireplace. There was a large, framed photograph of the extended family from the previous Christmas. My mother and father, my brother, his wife, their kids, and me, with Leo and Maya. We were all smiling, but the composition was telling. My mother had positioned my small family at the very edge of the frame, almost an afterthought. We were technically in the picture, but we were not part of the story. I had been living on the margins for years. Tonight, I was writing myself into the center of the narrative. It was time to go. I gathered my children, who came without a word. As we reached the foyer, my mother intercepted us, her face a mask of loving concern. She placed a hand on my shoulder, her grip surprisingly strong. "Leaving so soon?" she asked, her voice a low, warning murmur. "Don't complicate something good. Nora." I looked at her, at the woman who had built an empire on the lie of family, who had decided I was the daughter who would understand. "I'm not," I replied, my voice clear and steady. "I'm opening it." The Monday after Christmas felt like a collective hangover. The air in the West Archer headquarters of Halbert and Lane was thick with a cloying sweetness, part pine-scented disinfectant, part the ghost of 1,000 expensive perfumes from the executive holiday party. A massive banner, printed in the company's signature warm and trustworthy blue, was stretched across the atrium. It read, "We're family here." I had never noticed how much the font resembled a threat. My inbox was an explosion of saccharine gratitude, a chain of reply-all emails from the senior management team, each one trying to outdo the last in their effusive thanks to my mother and Douglas Finch for the truly magical holiday season. They wrote about their children's joy, the incredible generosity of the company, and the unforgettable gifts. They were, without knowing it, creating a written record of their own complicity, a digital monument to the fraud. I selected every single one of the emails and moved them to a secure evidence folder. Then, I set up an auto-reply for all incoming messages. It was concise, professional, and cold as the slate on my mother's house. Thank you for your message. I am currently occupied with a comprehensive review of Q4 compliance. I will respond at my earliest convenience. I spent the morning in a glass-walled conference room on the 12th floor. The compliance department's quiet corner of the building. I didn't turn on the lights, preferring the gray, flat light of the December sky. My reflection stared back at me from the dark screen of the main monitor. I saw the dark circles under my eyes, a faint, bruised purple against my pale skin. I hadn't slept. I had spent the weekend building my case, creating a fortress of irrefutable logic around the 17 files. But my reflection's eyes were not tired. They were clear and steady. The woman in the glass was no longer a daughter or a sister or an employee. She was an instrument of the rules. At precisely 11:47 a.m., the email I had been waiting for arrived. It was from the chair of the Ethics Committee, a notoriously rigid and impartial board member from our German subsidiary. The subject line was stark. Urgent. Extraordinary session of the Ethics Committee. The body was even starker. A session has been called for 4:30 p.m. today. December 26th. Your presence is required. A secure link will follow. Do not discuss this meeting with anyone. 4:30 p.m. The timing was a dagger. The annual Employee Angels Party, a company-wide celebration of peer-nominated employees, was scheduled to begin at 5 o'clock p.m. It was my mother's flagship cultural event, the culmination of her Mom of H&L persona, where she would personally hand out awards to tearful, grateful employees. The committee was setting the stage for a collision. They had received my message. They had seen enough to be alarmed, and they were giving me the arena. My next step was to secure my own position, my contract. Like all senior-level employment agreements at H&L, contained a robust whistleblower clause. It stipulated that any employee who brought forward evidence of high-level misconduct was entitled to independent legal counsel, paid for by the company. It was a clause my mother herself had championed in a press release about corporate transparency. I forwarded the entire evidence package, encrypted, to the external law firm named in the contract. My message was simple. Per Section 11.3b of my employment agreement, I am formally invoking whistleblower protection. Please find the initial evidence package attached. I await your counsel. I was no longer just an employee. I was a protected entity, operating under the aegis of the very policies Marla claimed to uphold. My phone buzzed on the table. A text message. It was from Douglas Finch. My stomach tightened. I had not heard a word from my mother, which was its own kind of message. Finch's was more direct. The night was beautiful. Marla was in top form. Your kids were very well behaved. The words slid under my skin like ice water. It wasn't a friendly text. It was a shot across the bow. I see you. I see your children. It was a reminder of what he thought was my greatest vulnerability. He was wrong. They were my greatest strength. I stared at the message, at the 3 little dots that indicated he was typing again, and then stopped. He was waiting for a reaction, for a sign of fear. I turned the phone over, placing it screen down on the table. I would not reply. My reply would be delivered at 4:30 p.m. I needed to walk. I took the elevator to the 18th floor, the executive wing. The carpet was thicker up here, the air quieter. In the center of the reception area stood the corporate Christmas tree, a perfect, symmetrical blue spruce decorated with hundreds of silver and blue ornaments, each one bearing the H&L logo. At its base was a large, ornate chest with a sign that read, "Holiday Joy. Take a chance in our random gift draw." It was another one of my mother's performative gestures of inclusivity. I drifted closer. Employees were laughing as they reached into the chest and pulled out small, beautifully wrapped boxes. But as I watched, I noticed something. A young marketing assistant pulled out a box with a tag for a high-end coffee maker. 5 minutes later, an analyst from finance pulled out a box with the exact same wrapping, the exact same ribbon, and the exact same tag. It wasn't a random draw. It was a staged distribution. My mother had curated a specific number of high-value gifts, and the rest were cheap, corporate-branded trinkets. Even her illusion of fairness was a meticulously managed lie. The largest box, wrapped in shimmering silver paper, sat on a pedestal next to the chest. A sign on it read, "Grand Prize." It was an instant photo printer, a popular and desirable gadget. While no one was looking, I took a small sticker from my pocket. It was a QR code, identical to the one I had placed in the gift at my mother's house. I peeled off the back and pressed it firmly to the underside of the grand prize box, a second landmine, placed in plain sight. The whole office believed their good fortune came from luck, from the random chance of a drawing. I believed in the audit trail. I believed in the immutable certainty of a file's changelog. They believed in magic. I believed in math. I returned to my office and made one final call. It was to the internal communications team, the people responsible for the 5 p.m. live stream of the Employee Angels ceremony. "Hi, Sarah," I said, my voice warm and friendly. "It's Nora Vale in compliance." "Nora, hi. Getting excited for the party?" "Absolutely," I lied smoothly. "Listen, I know it's last minute, but I was hoping to get a small slot in the live stream. Just a few minutes. I wanted to say a few words on behalf of our department about the importance of company culture, especially after such a generous holiday season." There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her clicking. "Oh, well, that's really nice of you. Nora, everyone assumes compliance is all doom and gloom." "Exactly," I said. "I'm trying to change that perception. 7 minutes. That's all I need, right after Marla's opening remarks." 7 minutes, she repeated. "Okay, I think we can do that. Marla will be so pleased." "I'm sure she will be," I said. They thought I was coming to the stage to say thank you. They thought I was coming to praise the culture, to reinforce the family myth, to be the good, understanding daughter. They were about to find out what a compliance review really looked like. At 4:29 p.m., the world was a quiet, air-conditioned hum. I stood in the wings of the small auditorium we used for company town halls, the silver-wrapped grand prize box held firmly in my hands. On stage, under the hot, bright glare of the studio lights, my mother and Douglas Finch were arranged in 2 plush, royal blue armchairs. They looked like monarchs holding court, smiling and chatting with the production crew, completely at ease, bathed in the glow of their own perceived benevolence. They were not just executives, they were celebrities in the small, self-contained universe of Halbert and Lane, the mom and dad of the corporate family. The floor manager gave me a thumbs up. "Ready, Nora? You're on after the intro video." I nodded, my throat dry. My hands, holding the box, were cold, but they were not shaking. A strange, glacial calm had settled over me. This was no longer personal. It was procedural. I was an agent of a system they had created, a system they had taught me to believe in, and I was about to execute its ultimate function. The lights dimmed, and a slickly produced video filled the 30-foot LED screen behind the chairs. It was a montage of smiling employees, tearful award recipients from previous years, and soaring orchestral music, all narrated by my mother's warm, reassuring voice, speaking of community, loyalty, and family. When the video faded to the H&L logo, the lights came up, and the applause was loud and genuine. This audience believed. Marla smiled, a picture of maternal pride. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome, Chapin, everyone, to our most special night of the year. She spoke for a few minutes, hitting all her usual notes of gratitude and togetherness. Then, she turned to the camera. And now, before we begin with our employee angels, we have a special addition to our program, a word from our own head of compliance, Nora Vale. The applause was polite, a little confused. I walked onto the stage. The heat of the lights, a physical pressure. I placed the silver box on the lectern and adjusted the microphone. My movements measured and deliberate. I looked out, past the blinding lights, into the sea of faces, and then I looked at my mother and at Douglas Finch. They were both smiling encouragingly. They thought I was there to pay tribute. Good afternoon, I began, my voice clear and even, amplified throughout the auditorium and to the hundreds of employees watching the live stream. My mother, Marla, is right. This is a special night. It's a night about celebrating the values that hold our company together. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the front row. We often think of gifts as things that come in boxes, but compliance is also a gift. It isn't always wrapped in a silver bow, but it's valuable nonetheless, because the gift of compliance is that it unwraps the truth. A flicker of uncertainty crossed my mother's face. Finch's smile tightened at the edges. In the spirit of a transparent and fair culture, I continued, gesturing to the silver box, I'd like to begin by awarding the grand prize from the holiday draw on the 18th floor. It's supposed to be a random draw, after all. I scanned the audience. Maria, from marketing, row 3, would you please come up and open our grand prize for everyone to see? Maria, a young, earnest social media manager, looked startled, then thrilled. She hurried to the stage, her face flushed with excitement. The live stream cameras zoomed in on her as she approached the lectern. Go ahead, Maria, I said gently. Let's see what you've won. Her fingers, trembling slightly, untied the perfect silver bow and lifted the lid. She peered inside, her smile faltering. The box was empty, except for a single, white, elegant card resting on the bottom. Confused, she picked it up and showed it to me. On it was the QR code. There seems to be a mistake, she said, her voice a nervous whisper into the microphone. No mistake, I said, taking the card from her. Thank you, Maria. I turned to face the main camera, holding the card up. Sometimes the most valuable prize isn't a thing, it's information. I turned and held the card up to a small scanner on the lectern connected to the main display. For a second, there was only the H&L logo on the giant screen behind me, and then it was replaced. The familiar blue and gray grid of an Excel spreadsheet filled the screen. The title at the top was stark, Ledger WLG 23 Core Raw. A collective. Sharp intake of breath rippled through the auditorium. I used the mouse on the lectern to scroll to the right, highlighting 2 columns. The first was titled Vendor Contribution, the second, Equity Kickback Designation, and in that second column, a list of names: Remy Carter, Landon Albright, Sophia Davies, the children of the people sitting not 10 feet away from me. The internal chat window on the side of the live stream, which had been scrolling with cheerful Go Maria messages, exploded. WTF is this? Is that a real ledger? That's Finch's son's name. What the hell is Equity Kickback? Douglas Finch was on his feet, his face a mask of purple fury. He lunged for the microphone on the table next to his chair. Shut this down, he roared, his voice cracking. This is a breach. That is confidential company material. I turned to face him, my own microphone still live. My voice cut through his, cold and sharp. Correct, Mr. Finch. It is confidential company material. And this specific document, which I accessed using my legal authority as head of compliance, bears your digital signature of approval. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked as if I had struck him. Perhaps this will add some context, I said. Clicking the mouse again. The spreadsheet vanished, replaced by video footage. It was grainy, clearly from a street-level security camera, but the image was unmistakable. A delivery truck with the logo North Ferry Logistics was parked on a familiar, tree-lined suburban street, my mother's street. The timestamp in the corner read December 22nd. The video showed two men unloading dozens of boxes wrapped in burgundy paper and carrying them into my mother's house. A GPS data map was superimposed on the screen, showing the truck's route from a warehouse directly to her front door. I clicked again, and the screen showed a registered PEO box address. Then, a second document appeared beside it, showing the same POMO box as the mailing address for Finch's H&L Cares Foundation. The connection was now undeniable, displayed 30 feet high for the entire company to see. North Ferry Logistics, the foundation, and the gifts were all one and the same. I turned to look at my mother. She hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still in her blue velvet chair, her hands clutching its arms, but she was no longer looking at me, or the screen, or the audience. Her eyes were closed, her face pale and still under the hot lights. The mom of H&L had left the building. I stepped away from the lectern, my work with the evidence done. I walked to the front of the stage, my voice dropping from its sharp, procedural tone to something quieter, yet more intense. For years, we've been told that we are a family here, I said, looking out at the stunned faces. We are told to make sacrifices for the good of the family. We saw the emails. Bonuses were cut because of economic headwinds. We were all in it together. My eyes found my mother's closed face. But it seems there are two families at Halbert and Lane. There is the family that is asked to sacrifice, and there is the family that receives equity units in Christmas boxes. I let the silence hang for a moment. You want to call us a family? My voice was steady, but it carried the weight of 1,000 paper cuts, 1,000 quiet slights. Then stop robbing the kids who don't have a seat at your table. Two security guards, their faces grim and confused, started to move toward the stage, looking to the silent figures of Finch and Marla for a command that would not come. But before they could take another step, a new voice cut through the tension. Hold on. It was Charles Mercer, the company's general counsel, rising from his seat in the front row. He was a creature of pure procedure, a man who never spoke without deliberation. His face was unreadable. He looked at the security guards, then at me, and then he addressed the entire silent auditorium. Everyone, please remain seated. The live stream will now be terminated. He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. The Ethics Committee has a statement to make. The feed cut to black, but the stage lights remained on, trapping us in a harsh, silent tableau. The auditorium, once a space of celebration, now felt like a courtroom. Charles Mercer didn't take the stage. He stood beside it, a grim master of ceremonies. He nodded to someone in the wings, and the giant LED screen, which moments ago had displayed the damning evidence, now showed the face of a man I recognized instantly, Klaus Richter, the chairman of the Ethics Committee. His face was severe, his eyes framed by steel-rimmed glasses, and he was broadcasting from an office in Frankfurt that was as sterile and humorless as he was. Good evening, Richter's voice boomed into the auditorium, the German accent clipping each word with surgical precision. There were no pleasantries. Pursuant to an emergency session convened at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, the Ethics Committee of Halbert and Lane has reviewed preliminary evidence of significant financial misconduct and breaches of fiduciary duty by senior members of the executive team. He did not need to name them. He simply paused, and every eye in the room swiveled to the two blue velvet chairs. Douglas Finch was still standing, his face blotchy, his hands clenched into fists. My mother remained seated, her eyes now open, but staring at nothing, a porcelain doll whose strings had been cut. Effective immediately, Richter continued, his voice an iron bar. Marla Vale, Chief Human Resources Officer, and Douglas Finch, Chief Operating Officer, are placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of a full, independent investigation. They are to have no contact with any Halbert and Lane employees, and their access to all company systems and properties is hereby revoked. It was a corporate execution, delivered live and without anesthetic. A low, shocked murmur spread through the audience. This wasn't a reprimand, it was an excision. Furthermore, Richter said, his gaze seemingly boring through the screen, the committee has issued a company-wide litigation hold. All documents, emails, and financial records related to the Community and Employee Wellness Gift Fund and the vendor North Ferry Logistics are to be preserved. The fund itself is frozen. We will be engaging a third-party forensic accounting firm to conduct a complete audit, the results of which will be delivered to the board and the relevant regulatory authorities. The live stream camera, still active for the closed internal feed, did a slow, cruel zoom onto my mother's face. The talk show host's smile was gone. The mask of maternal warmth had shattered, and for the first time in my life, I saw her face stripped of all artifice. Her lips were pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Her eyes, usually so adept at projecting emotion, were flat, opaque, reflecting the glare of the stage lights. She looked small in that big blue chair. A queen suddenly finding her castle was made of cardboard. I took a step forward, back to the lectern. I held up a single sheet of paper. "Mr. Mercer," I said, my voice steady, addressing the general counsel. "For the record, I would like to present this. It is a formal invocation of my rights under Section 11.3b of the Halbert and Lane Code of Conduct." I then read from the paper, my voice carrying through the silent room. "The company shall provide full legal protection and indemnification to any employee who, in good faith, reports evidence of misconduct. Such an employee shall be protected from any and all forms of retaliation, direct or indirect, and their position and compensation shall be secured for the duration of any subsequent investigation." I placed the paper on the lectern. "I trust the company will honor the policies it wrote." It was a public declaration, a line drawn in front of the entire leadership team. I was not a disgruntled daughter. I was a protected whistleblower, and I was putting them on notice. From the front row, a woman stood up. It was Anita Shah, the deputy head of HR, a woman who had lived in my mother's shadow for a decade. Her face was pale, but her voice was firm. "On behalf of the Human Resources Department," she said, looking not at me or Marla, but at the audience, "I want to be clear. Halbert and Lane has a zero-tolerance policy for conflicts of interest and unauthorized compensation. The actions displayed here tonight are not representative of our department or our company's values." It was the first oar pulling away from a sinking ship. Below the stage, the whispers were turning into a low roar of conversation. People were pointing at the now blank screen, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning comprehension. They were reevaluating every no they had received on a raise, every time their department's budget was cut while the executive wing got new furniture. They were looking at the executives in the front row, the ones whose children's names had been on that screen, and seeing them not as leaders, but as co-conspirators. The lights of the stage had been turned off, but 100 smaller spotlights of suspicion had just been switched on. My phone, still on the lectern, buzzed with an incoming message on the secure internal app. It was from Evelyn Reed, the new CFO, a pragmatic, no-nonsense woman who had been hired from outside the company 6 months ago. She was not part of Marla's inner circle. "Nora, stay in the auditorium after it clears." I typed a 2-word reply. "I'm here." My part in the public spectacle was over. I reached forward and switched off my microphone, the soft click echoing in the tense silence. I turned to the audience, the hundreds of faces still processing the demolition they had just witnessed. I gave a single, formal nod. I did not smile. I did not need to. I just breathed. A deep, slow breath that felt like the first one I had taken in years. As I turned to walk off stage, a young woman from the IT department was standing in the aisle. She looked no older than 25, her eyes wide. As I passed, she spoke, her voice a barely audible whisper, meant only for me. "Thank you." I didn't break my stride. I just gave her the slightest of nods in acknowledgement, a silent confirmation. I didn't look back. A loud, electronic chime, the sound for company-wide priority announcements, echoed through the auditorium speakers. A robotic female voice followed. This town hall has now entered a closed session. All non-essential personnel, please exit the auditorium immediately. The lights in the seating area came up, and the spell was broken. The show was over. The real work was about to begin. The auditorium emptied with a strange, muffled urgency, the usual post-meeting chatter replaced by hushed whispers and the shuffling of feet. I remained where I was, a fixed point in the emptying room. On the stage, security was discreetly escorting a stony-faced Douglas Finch through a side exit. My mother was already gone. I hadn't seen her leave. Charles Mercer, the general counsel, approached me. "Nora, conference room 3. Evelyn is waiting." He didn't smile. His face was a mask of grim necessity. This was damage control, and I was now a central part of the protocol. Conference room 3 was a glass box overlooking the now darkened atrium. The banner, "We're family here," was a bitter piece of irony in the gloom below. Evelyn Reed, the CFO, was already seated at the head of the long, polished table. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a complete absence of sentimentality. She gestured to the chair opposite her. As I sat, Mercer closed the heavy glass door, the soft thump sealing us in. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the overhead lights. In the center of the table, between us, sat a small, professional-grade audio recorder. Mercer pressed a button, and a tiny red light blinked on. "This meeting is being recorded for legal purposes," he stated, his voice flat. Present are Evelyn Reed, Acting Chief Financial Officer, Charles Mercer, General Counsel, and Nora Vale, Head of Compliance. The time is 5:17 p.m., December 26th. There was no preamble, no small talk. We were 3 figures in a sterile room, the emotional chaos of the last hour distilled into a formal proceeding. I placed a small, encrypted hard drive on the table. It slid a few inches across the polished wood, coming to a stop directly in front of Evelyn. "Here is everything," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. 17 primary files, plus all supporting documentation. Every file is time-stamped from my initial access, cataloged, and contains a complete chain of custody report. The originals are secured on a legally protected off-site server. This is a clean copy. Evelyn looked at the drive, then at me. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't ask about the evidence. She knew it was damning. She had seen it on the screen with everyone else. She had likely been in the emergency committee meeting and had seen even more. She folded her hands on the table, her gaze direct and penetrating. She asked the only question that mattered now. "What do you want, Nora?" It wasn't an accusation. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a practical inquiry from one professional to another. The company was bleeding, and she needed to know the price of a tourniquet. I had anticipated this question. I had spent the entire weekend thinking about it. In between combing through ledgers and building my case, I could have asked for a promotion, a massive raise, a golden parachute to walk away and never look back. I could have asked for a piece of the company they had stolen from. "First," I said, meeting her gaze without blinking. "The bonus pool, the one that was cut due to economic headwinds, I want it restored, in full, and I want the distribution recalculated by a third-party auditor based on the original performance metrics, not the calibration sessions run by Marla and Finch. Every employee who had their bonus cut gets what they rightfully earned, effective this quarter." Evelyn nodded slowly. It was a significant financial hit, but it was manageable. It was a cost of doing business. "Done," she said. "And?" There was always an and. She knew I wasn't finished. "Second," I continued, "an immediate and permanent dissolution of all executive gifting programs, especially those connected to family members. A new policy needs to be drafted by my office and approved by the board." stipulating that no employee can receive non-monetary compensation of any kind without it being fully declared, taxed, and reported in our public filings. No more wellness gifts, no more equity units and Christmas boxes. "That is reasonable," Mercer interjected, his legal mind seeing the necessity of closing the loophole. "It should have been the policy all along." "And?" Evelyn asked again, her eyes never leaving mine. This was the part they wouldn't expect, the part that wasn't about money or power. "I want a public apology," I said. "An email, sent from you as the acting head of leadership, to every single employee in this company. It will not be written by a PR firm. It will be simple and direct. It will state that the previous leadership betrayed the trust of its employees, that their actions were a violation of our stated values, and that the company is profoundly sorry." I took a breath. "And it will specifically apologize to the children of our employees for making them witnesses to a system that valued connection over contribution, and for making them feel, even for a moment, that they were worth less than the children of the executives." Silence. The hum of the lights seemed to grow louder. Charles Mercer looked down at his notes. Evelyn, however, just watched me, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. It might have been surprise. It might have been respect. Finally, she spoke. "The financial and policy demands are straightforward. The apology is unconventional, but it is correct." She paused. "This will not be easy for you. Nora, Marla, she will hate you for this." The word hate landed in the sterile room with a dull thud. It was a personal, messy word in this clean, procedural space. "She is my mother," I said, and the distinction was clear in my own mind for the first time. "My job is head of compliance. Tonight, I did my job." The finality of my own words settled around me. I had chosen my role. I had drawn the line not in the sand, but in the bedrock of my own integrity. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost 6 p.m. My children were with a sitter, a kind college student who was probably wondering where I was. The adrenaline that had sustained me for the past 24 hours was beginning to recede, leaving a deep, bone-weary exhaustion in its place. "I need to go home," I said, my voice softer now. "I need about 30 minutes to get my children settled." Evelyn nodded, a gesture of immediate understanding. She picked up her phone. "Charles, have the corporate car service bring a town car to the front entrance immediately, for Nora Vale." She looked at me. "Take as long as you need. The car will wait. We owe them that much." The gesture, small as it was, almost broke me, a flicker of warmth, of humanity, in the coldest of rooms. My own phone buzzed. It was a priority alert from the company's internal notification system. The subject line was an official-looking string of characters. HR Update Executive Status. The body of the message was a single, stark sentence. "Effective immediately. Marla Vale and Douglas Finch have been terminated from their positions at Halbert and Lane for cause." Terminated, not suspended, not on leave. It was over. The word was so brutal, so final. I looked up from my phone, at the plate glass wall of the conference room. I saw my own reflection, a silhouette against the dark atrium. The tremor that had lived in my hands for months, a low-grade hum of constant stress and suppressed anger, was gone. My reflection was tired, pale, and utterly still. She was just standing there, straight. The elevator doors opened onto the 18th floor with a soft, respectful chime. The sound was obscene in the profound silence that had fallen. This was my mother's kingdom, the executive wing, and it was now a ghost town. The thick plush carpet absorbed the sound of my footsteps, leaving me to move through the space like a phantom. The lights were dimmed to their after-hours setting, casting long, distorted shadows from the oversized abstract sculptures and potted orchids that dotted the landscape. The air was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of floor wax and fear. Every glass-walled office I passed was dark, their occupants either dismissed or hiding below, trying to calculate their proximity to the blast radius. She was waiting for me by the bank of windows at the far end of the hall, the ones that looked out over the sprawling, the indifferent lights of the city. She was not crying. She was not screaming. She was standing perfectly still, her back partially to me, staring out at the view she had once considered her birthright. She was wearing a coat of deep, dark red, the color of dried blood. In the muted light of the hallway, it didn't look like a piece of clothing. It looked like a wound. I walked toward her, my heels making no sound. I felt nothing, not hatred, not pity, not the bitter satisfaction I might have expected. There was only a great, hollow emptiness, the feeling of a long and painful task finally reaching its conclusion. She must have heard my approach, or perhaps she simply felt my presence, a shift in the dead air. She turned slowly, her movements stiff, like a statue being rotated on its pedestal. Her face was a pale, blank canvas, her makeup still perfect, but her eyes were black holes, burned out from the inside. Her voice, when she spoke, was not the warm, resonant instrument of the CHRO. It was a low, guttural rasp, full of gravel and broken glass. "You smeared my name in front of the entire company." She said it as if it were a fact, a line item on a damage report. There was no question, no disbelief, just the flat statement of her ruin and her accusation of its architect. I stopped a few feet from her. The space between us felt charged, a vacuum humming with unspoken history. "No," I said, my own voice quiet, devoid of emotion. It was the voice I used for depositions. "I opened a gift you sent to the wrong address." A muscle in her jaw twitched. My words, so simple and true, had bypassed her defenses. I was not arguing on her terms. I was not engaging with the narrative of betrayal she was trying to build. I was simply stating the facts of the case. She tried again, shifting her footing, searching for a different line of attack. The matriarch, making her final appeal. "Everything I did," she said, her voice gaining a faint tremor of self-righteousness, "I did for this family." The word hung in the cold air between us. Family, the weapon she had wielded my entire life, the shield she had used to justify every exclusion, every manipulation. It was her last, most powerful word, and it was meaningless. "Which family?" I asked. The question was soft, but it landed like a physical blow. I saw her flinch. "The family of executives who call you mom when they want a promotion? Or the 2 children at home who call me mother? The ones who stood in your living room and learned that they weren't good enough to receive a present?" Her face crumpled, just for a second, before she rebuilt her mask of stone. I had taken her word and turned it into a mirror, forcing her to see the 2 irreconcilable worlds she had created. I reached into the pocket of my own coat. My fingers found the cool, thick cardstock of the gift tag, the one I had picked up from her rug, the piece of evidence that had started it all. I held it out to her. It lay flat on my palm, the elegant calligraphy, for Remy Carter, looking like a line from a eulogy. "I don't need an apology," I said, my voice as steady as a surgeon's hand. "I don't need you to understand. I just need you to stop." I stepped forward and placed the tag in her hand. Her fingers were limp, cold, and they did not close around it. The tag rested on her open palm, a final, damning offering. This was it, the last exchange. I was returning the poison to its source. She looked down at the tag, at the evidence of her crime resting in the palm of her hand, and then she did something I had never seen her do before. She broke. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a quiet, internal implosion. She turned her face away from me, toward the dark glass of the window. Her shoulders, held so rigidly just moments before, began to shake. And for the first time in my life, I heard the sound of my mother's breathing, stripped of all performance. It was a raw, ragged, desperate gasp for air. The sound of a woman drowning on dry land. There was no microphone to amplify her pain into a tool. There was no audience to applaud her resilience. There was just the awful, naked sound of her suffering, alone in a hallway that was once the seat of her power. I had seen what I needed to see. The performance was over. I turned and walked away, I did not run. I did not look back. Each step was a deliberate severing of a tie, a final walk away from the wreckage. I reached the main glass doors to the elevator lobby. They slid open with a soft, pneumatic hiss. As I stepped through, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass before the doors slid shut. She was a slash of dark red against the city lights, a solitary, diminished figure, trapped in the empty monument she had built. The doors closed, and she was gone. I stood in the silent lobby, alone, and waited for the elevator. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was another priority alert from the internal notification system, sent to all employees. The subject line read, Q4 compensation adjustment. The message was brief. The previously announced reduction to the Q4 bonus pool has been reversed. A full restoration, based on original performance metrics, has been approved by the board and the acting CFO. The corrected distributions will be effective immediately. I stared at the screen, at the clean, corporate font. It wasn't a message of triumph. It was a message of order restored. A correction to a ledger. A bug fixed in the system. I put the phone back in my pocket. The elevator arrived, its doors opening with another soft chime. I stepped inside, and as they closed, I saw my own reflection. I was just a woman in a dark coat, alone in a box of steel and light, going down, going home. The Blacktown car was an island of warmth and silence waiting at the curb. As I stepped out of the revolving doors of the Halbert and Lane building, the cold night air hit my face, sharp and clean, washing away the sterile, recycled atmosphere of the aftermath. The driver, a silhouette behind the wheel, gave a slight nod, his professionalism a small, steady anchor in the swirling chaos of the evening. He had already picked up my children from the sitter. They were in the back seat, their small faces pressed against the cool glass, waiting for me, and in each of their laps was a small, plain brown cardboard box. There was no wrapping paper, no ribbon, just a single word, printed in a stark, black, sans serif font on a white label: restitution. I slid into the plush leather seat beside them. The door closed with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing us off from the world, from the towering glass monolith behind us. Leo and Maya looked at their boxes, then at me, their eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and cautious curiosity. They were too young to understand the word, but they understood the tone. This was not a celebration, it was a correction. A third box, identical to theirs, sat on the seat beside me. My name was on the label. I picked it up. It was light, almost weightless. Inside, there was no gadget, no voucher, no expensive trinket. There was only a single, thick sheet of cream-colored cardstock, the official letterhead of the chief financial officer. The note was handwritten, in Evelyn Reed's sharp, decisive script. It was not a thank you card. It was a field report. Nora, thank you for opening the gift at the right time. Evelyn. That was all. It was perfect. It was not personal. It was not emotional. It was a professional acknowledgement from one pragmatist to another. She wasn't thanking me for being a hero. She was thanking me for doing my job, for executing a necessary and unpleasant task with precision. She was thanking me for cleaning up a mess. I folded the note and put it in my pocket. I looked at my children, at their quiet, waiting faces, and I felt the tectonic plates of my life finally settle into a new, more stable alignment. The grief, the anger, the years of quiet resentment, they were gone. The fire had burned itself out, leaving behind not ash, but forged steel. I did not cry. Crying was for the past. This was the beginning of the future. I took out my phone and sent a short, encrypted message to the distribution list for my entire compliance team. It was not a celebration, it was a directive, a new rule for a new era. Effective immediately. All non-monetary gifts received from vendors or internal departments are to be recorded and opened only in the office, in full view of your team. Transparency is not a goal, it is a procedure. I put the phone down. The car pulled away from the curb. merging smoothly into the stream of city traffic. For a few moments, we drove in silence, the only sound the soft hum of the engine. Then, Leo's small voice cut through the quiet. He looked from his box to my face, his brow furrowed in a child's earnest attempt to understand the new rules of the world. "Mom," he asked, "will there be presents next year?" I turned to him, and for the first time, I felt the tight knot of anxiety in my chest, the one that had lived there for years, finally dissolve. I looked at his hopeful face, and I gave him the truest answer I had ever given. "Yes, sweetie," I said, my voice clear and certain. "There will be, but not because of luck, because of fairness." He considered this for a moment, then nodded, satisfied. He didn't fully understand, but he understood the feeling behind the words. Fairness was a concept a child could believe in more deeply than magic. I picked up my phone one last time. There was one final piece of business. I opened my email drafts. The message I had composed in the glass room, the one I had been waiting to send until the moment was right, was waiting. The recipient list was simple: all employees global. The subject line was a clean, unambiguous statement: policy change, termination of all non-monetary gifting to executive family members. The body of the email was brief, written not in the convoluted jargon of corporate legalese, but in plain, direct English. It stated the new policy, outlined the requirements for transparency and disclosure, and cited the section of the corporate code of conduct under which it was authorized. It was not an argument. It was a declaration. It was the sound of a door being locked, forever, on the old way of doing things. My thumb hovered over the screen. This was the final click, the last tumbler falling into place. It was the quietest, most powerful act of my life. There was no audience. There was no applause. There were just my two children sitting beside me in the warm, safe darkness of the car. I pressed send. The screen was stable. There were no fireworks, no celebratory animation, just a single, small, gray word that appeared for a moment before fading. Sent? It was done. I turned off the phone and slid it into my bag. The work was over. I reached out and took my daughter's hand. Her small fingers curled around mine, a warm, solid presence in the dark. I looked out the window. The city slid past us, a river of light and motion. The streetlights passed one by one, their bright, white glow washing over us in rhythmic flashes. Each one, for a fleeting moment, was like a white envelope being opened, spilling its light onto the world, a promise of 1,000 truths, no longer hidden in the dark, but brought out, one by one, into the open. Thank you so much for listening to the story. I'd love to connect with all of you. So please comment below and let me know where in the world you're listening from and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. And if you'd like to give some extra support, hitting that hype button really helps this story get heard by more people.